I stood at the cliff's edge, breathless and shaking, river water still clinging to my clothes as our son's voice drifted down through the trees. I know you're alive. Just minutes before, he'd looked me in the eye and pushed. No hesitation, no anger, just emptiness. My husband's whisper echoed in my ear. Pretend we're dead. And in that moment, soaked and broken, I realized the truth no parent wants to face. Our own child wanted us gone. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Evelyn's scream echoes as her body slams the water below the cliff. I didn't feel the water, just the instant cold slap of it stealing everything. Breath, sound, gravity. Then the pain came, sudden and electric, as my shoulder hit something just beneath the surface. My lungs clamped shut. The scream I'd let out when Ryan shoved me became bubbles spiraling upward. For a moment, the world was only green water and the sound of blood in my ears. Then another splash beside me. David. He thrashed once before surfacing, gasping. Blood smeared down from his temple, pinking the water. His eyes found mine, wild, disoriented. Pretend we're dead, he rasped, choking. It's the only way. I nodded, though my body screamed for air and warmth. I floated on my back, barely kicking, letting the current tug me downstream. My dress ballooned around me. I focused on the sky, gray and still, like it hadn't just witnessed our son try to murder us. Ryan's face was the last thing I saw before I went over. Blank, like he was taking out the trash. Branches scratched my arms as we drifted beneath overhanging trees. I reached for David, our fingers brushing briefly before the current twisted us apart again. I could hear him breathing, ragged, low, but he kept his face still, slack, like a corpse. The water grew slower, muddier. A log jam caught my legs and I let it. I clung there, barely lifting my head above the surface, watching as David floated past, then also snagged on debris. We stayed like that, silent, trying not to move. I couldn't stop shaking, and not from the cold. What just happened wasn't a nightmare. It was real. Our son, my son, looked me in the eye and pushed. Minutes passed. Maybe more. I kept waiting for shouting. Footsteps along the ridge, some sign Ryan was looking down, checking if we were dead. But there was nothing. Just birds, and the low churn of the river. I slid onto the bank, limbs trembling. My knee gave out, and I collapsed into the mud. David stumbled out a few yards down, clutching his head. Blood streaked his temple and jaw. I crawled toward him, the wet ground sucking at my hands. "Are you okay?" I whispered. He nodded once, then winced. "I think so." Head's ringing. He looked at me, really looked. "You?" I didn't answer. What answer was there? Instead, I asked the only question I could wrap my mind around. Why would he do it? David didn't respond right away. He just stared past me, up the ravine. "We've been blind," he said finally. "I think he's been planning this longer than we want to admit." I felt something inside me shift, a numbness replacing the shock. "I didn't even recognize his face," I said. "Like he disappeared." David moved closer, helping me to my feet. "We can't go back up," he murmured. "He thinks we're dead. Let's keep it that way." "Go where?" He scanned the woods. "Anywhere he won't look. We need time. We need to think." I opened my mouth to protest, but then I saw it. A flicker of movement up on the ridge, a dark shape between the trees. Ryan. He hadn't left. I grabbed David's arm. He followed my gaze. His breath caught. Without a word, We slipped deeper into the underbrush, feet sinking into soft earth, our clothes dragging wetly behind us. Every step hurt, but fear moved us. Behind us, the ridge stayed still, until a voice floated down. "I know you're alive." It wasn't a shout, it was calm, certain. "Ryan." David froze. My pulse kicked hard. We crouched low behind a fallen log, the sound of our breathing loud in my ears. I looked at David. His jaw tightened. "We're not running anymore," he said, but we already were. By the time the sky softened to gray and the mist lifted off the river like steam from a wound, we'd been walking for what felt like hours. Not far, just enough to feel it in our bones. The current had dragged us half a mile downstream before we found a muddy slope we could climb without collapsing. We crawled up the embankment like animals, soaked, bruised, broken. David fell to his knees once we hit dry ground, his right arm hanging strangely at his side. I didn't need to touch it to know. It was broken. His face was tight with pain, jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth, but he said nothing. My ribs screamed every time I breathed too deep. I tried to lift my arms and couldn't. Everything inside me felt wrong, like it had been rearranged. We found cover beneath a cluster of old pines, their thick branches dipping low enough to hide us if we stayed crouched. The hollow at their base was dry, soft with old needles. David sank down against the trunk and let out a sound. Not quite a groan, not quite a cry. I sat across from him, knees pulled to my chest, my wet dress clinging like skin. The silence between us had changed, not thick with fear anymore, but heavy with something worse. I don't know how long I stared at him. His eyes were closed, his mouth slack, but not asleep, just somewhere else. "Why, David?" My voice cracked in the middle. I swallowed and tried again. "Why would he do this?" He opened his eyes slowly. Something flinched behind them. "I don't know." "Don't lie to me." A pause. Then he looked away. "He's covering something," he said quietly. "Something he thinks we saw, or could see. I don't know what it is, Evelyn, but it's big enough to make him try to erase us." "Erase us," I repeated, the words tasting foreign. He was our baby, our boy. David didn't answer. His arm had started to swell, badly. I crawled to him, pressed a trembling hand against his forehead. Warm, but not fevered. Yet. "We need to splint that," I said. "Later," he murmured. "If we stay alive that long." I looked up. Through a gap in the canopy, the sun had begun to break through, washing the trees in pale gold. It should have felt like relief. It didn't. Somewhere behind us, miles or feet, I couldn't tell, Ryan was still out there. Maybe still watching. Maybe hunting. I leaned back against the tree beside him. The silence felt like it would crush me if I didn't say something, do something. So I did what I hadn't let myself do yet. I cried, quiet at first, then shaking, breathless, the kind of sobs you try to hold in for too long and then can't. David didn't speak, didn't touch me, he just listened. That felt like enough. When I could finally breathe again, I whispered, "We can't go to the police." "No," he said. "They'll say we imagined it, or that we're trying to frame him. They'll say we jumped." I closed my eyes. "So what do we do?" He turned to me, face drawn and pale. "We disappear. We stay quiet. We listen. We wait. And we figure out what the hell he's hiding." I nodded slowly, even as something inside me rebelled. A mother doesn't hide from her child. She goes to him. She fights for him. But Ryan had made his choice, and now we had to make ours. Overhead, a hawk circled once, twice. Its cry echoed across the trees, sharp, cutting. David's eyes followed it. Like it's marking something, he muttered. I looked up too. It hovered, then veered west, toward the cliffs. Maybe it had seen bodies before. Maybe it expected to see them again. I felt the chill settle over me again. Because maybe it would. The forest didn't care that we were grieving, or hunted, or broken. Each morning blurred into the next, the cold bleeding deeper into our bones. My ribs throbbed less, but only because the rest of me hurt more. David's arm had gone purple from shoulder to wrist. He kept it tucked close, splinted awkwardly with snapped branches and duct tape from his pack. A relic from a life when we planned hikes, not escapes. On the fourth morning, we moved. Not out of choice, but necessity. We'd rationed 2 protein bars and half a bottle of water. The rest had floated away with our dignity. We were starving, weak, and still too close to the cliffs. David remembered a ranger's cabin, abandoned in the off-season, maybe 5-6 miles east. The hike should have taken 2 hours. It took nearly 7. The silence between us had settled into something functional. We didn't speak unless it was to warn about footing, or to point out fresh animal scat. Every time a bird startled overhead, I flinched. I wanted to hate Ryan, but hate was too clean. What I felt was raw, like betrayal had teeth, and was still chewing through my insides. By the time we saw the cabin, half hidden behind a ridge of birch trees, I could barely walk straight. David sagged against the door frame like a man who'd finished a marathon on one leg. It creaked open. Dust, cobwebs, cold air. But it was shelter. Inside, we found a cot with a ripped mattress, a rusted sink, and a 2-way radio, long forgotten on a shelf. David grunted, lowering himself to the floor with a grimace. I dropped beside him, shivering. He reached for the radio. Maybe it still works. A crackle of static, a low hum. Then, voices. Faint, but real. David turned the dial slowly, searching. Then a station came into focus. No signs of foul play, though authorities are still investigating the area near the cliffs where the bodies are presumed to have entered the water. My blood turned cold. A tragic accident, say officials. The couple's adult son, Ryan Ford, gave a statement to press earlier today. David and I stared at each other. His face went pale. Then the voice shifted, softer, male, cracking with grief. They were good people, my parents. I still don't understand what happened. 1 minute we were talking, the next, they were gone. I knew that voice. Too well. Ryan. A sob, perfectly timed, then silence. David stood too fast and staggered back against the shelf. I grabbed the radio and slammed it into the floor. Once, twice, a third time. Plastic cracked, wires tore. The silence that followed rang louder than the static. I was shaking. He's grieving, I hissed. He's grieving on TV while the world writes our obituary. David knelt, wincing, cradling his useless arm. I knew something was wrong, he said quietly. I should have told you earlier. What? He looked up at me. Before the trip, I found transfers. Large ones. Offshore accounts. Hidden under shell companies. Millions. I blinked. His? David nodded. His name. His IP. He didn't even try to hide it that well. So all of this, the hike, the push, the act, it's to protect that? He's laundering something. Fraud. Maybe worse. I don't know yet. But he knew I saw it, and he couldn't risk both of us putting it together. It clicked then, cold and sharp in my chest. He silenced us, I whispered, to save himself. The trees outside rustled with wind, but the cabin felt too still, too grave. David watched me closely. What now? I looked down at the broken radio, the cracked casing, the silence we'd returned to. I thought about the hawk, the cliff, the way Ryan's voice had sounded. So sincere, so practiced. Then I looked David in the eye. Now, I said, my voice steady, we make him believe he succeeded. David's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I stared at the shattered radio. I mean, we don't tell anyone, not yet. Not until we know everything. Outside, a single crow called. Inside, I didn't blink. We play dead, I said, and we haunt him. Smoke was the first lie. We waited until sunset, when the sky burned orange and the wind shifted west. David limped out first, clutching a bundle of our wet, bloodied clothes. I followed with the knife, a small utility blade we'd found in the ranger cabin's emergency kit. We chose a low bend in the river, where the current forked around a mossy ridge. There, David scattered footprints, deep, deliberate, dragging, as if we'd followed the bank in desperation. I added small streaks of red on leaves and rock, pinched from a healing scab on David's temple. Just enough to look like injury, not enough to seem staged. Then we burned everything. My scarf, his torn jacket, a strip of flannel soaked in river water and pressed into mud to mimic old blood. The smoke coiled low, then rose high into the trees. David doused the rest with water and stirred the ash with a stick. Make it messy, I said. We need them to stop looking. We walked back to the cabin in silence. That night, I woke to the sound of David scribbling. He sat cross-legged on the floor, his splinted arm awkward, jaw clenched in focus. He'd pried the back off the emergency kit and found a small waterproof notepad and pen. Now he was filling the pages with blocky, precise handwriting. IDs, he murmured when he noticed me watching. I know a guy in Portland. Still owes me from a fire season 10 years ago. He flipped the page, writing again. We need bank accounts too. Basic stuff. Rent, phones, food. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. You think we'll make it that far? He met my eyes. We have to. 2 days later, the envelope arrived. It wasn't magic. Just quiet loyalty. A former ranger buddy had stashed a packet in a drop box David could still access off the old service road. Inside, IDs, a credit card under a burner name, even bus tickets tucked into a folded flannel shirt like it was laundry. Elaine and Mark Harris. The names felt foreign in my mouth, like ash. We moved before dawn. Back at the cabin, I did the last thing that tethered me to who I'd been. I stood in front of the cracked mirror above the rusted sink and cut my hair. The scissors shook in my hand. The first snip was jagged, uneven. A clump of blonde fell into the basin like it had been severed, not trimmed. I kept going, breath tight, hands trembling. When I was done, I barely recognized myself. The cut was crude, chin length, revealing more of my face than I wanted. The woman in the mirror looked harder, older. She looked like someone who'd been erased and had started sketching herself back in, one stroke at a time. David came up behind me, slow and careful. He didn't say anything. I hate how it looks, I said. I don't. I wasn't asking. He gave a ghost of a smile, then touched the edge of my shoulder. I know you miss him, he said softly, the version of him we thought we had. I turned toward him. I do, I said. But that version died the second he smiled while we fell. David nodded once. We'll rebuild, he said, quietly. I looked past him toward the trees, and beyond them, the cliffs, the lies, the press conference, the millions he thought no one would trace. No, David, I said, we won't rebuild, not quietly. He blinked. Then how? I let out a slow breath. We'll return, I said, louder than ever. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves scattered across the steps. Somewhere deep in the woods, a branch cracked. We both turned. Someone, or something, had moved. The church smelled like lilies and polish, a sharp sweetness layered over old wood and candle wax. 2 weeks of hiding had stripped everything familiar from us. Our names, our faces, our scents. But this was the first time we'd stepped into Ryan's new world since the fall. We weren't on the guest list. We weren't even alive. David and I stood at the back, heads bowed, shoulders bent like mourners with no one left to mourn. Black clothes borrowed from a thrift store in a town nobody remembered, my hair tucked under a scarf, David's splinted arm hidden beneath a coat sleeve. We looked like ghosts, because that's what we needed to be. At the front of the nave, the altar was drowned in white flowers and framed photographs. Me, David, and Ryan. Birthdays, holidays, smiles. Proof of a family that no longer existed. Proof that Ryan had learned how to weaponize nostalgia. The crowd filled the pews. Old neighbors, colleagues, people we hadn't seen in years. Cameras clicked softly from the press section. A cluster of them near the aisle whispered over notepads, pen scratching. And then Ryan walked out. He wore black, no tie. His hair was shorter, neatly combed, a widow's peak glistening under the chandeliers. He looked thinner, but not broken. The image of a grieving son in a designer suit. My heart tried to lurch out of my chest. David's fingers brushed mine briefly, a silent anchor. Ryan approached the lectern. The microphone hummed once, then stilled. "I don't know how to begin," he said, voice rough, eyes glistening. They were my parents, my compass, my home. He swallowed, looked down at his notes, then back up. Losing them. It's like losing the map to your life. You wake up and nothing points north anymore. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Ryan's mouth trembled, perfectly timed. I gripped the pew so tightly my knuckles ached. "She would have hated this fuss," Ryan said with a small smile. "But Dad would have insisted on it. And so, here we are. Not to mourn, but to remember." He stepped back. A low swell of organ music began, soft and mournful. People shifted, sniffled, bowed heads. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A woman leaning toward another near the press section. Dark hair cut sharply at her jaw, pen poised above a leather-bound notebook. Lydia Hale. I recognized her name from a byline years ago. Investigative. Relentless. "No bodies recovered?" she murmured to her colleague. Her voice barely carried over the music, but I caught it. Her colleague whispered something back. Lydia's eyes narrowed, scanning the crowd. David tensed beside me. "She's looking," he murmured under his breath. At the front, Ryan sat beside Mara, his fiancée. I hadn't seen her in years, but she looked like someone waiting for a verdict. Pale, shoulders stiff, her hand clasped in Ryan's but not squeezing back. Her eyes darted toward the doors, the windows, the cameras, anywhere but at him. A part of me softened and hardened at the same time. Did she know? Was she complicit? Or just another piece in his game? Lydia's pen stilled. She tilted her head slightly, like a bird catching a distant sound. Then she scribbled something fast, her lips pressed tight. I squeezed David's arm. "She'll find the truth before he does," I whispered. His eyes flicked to mine. "If she lives long enough." For the first time since the water closed over my head, something flickered inside me that wasn't rage, or grief. It was smaller, sharper. Hope. We stayed through the last hymn, heads still low. As the crowd filed out, I caught a glimpse of Lydia again, her gaze sweeping the pews with surgical precision. For one heartbeat, her eyes landed on mine. Then she blinked and looked away. I exhaled slowly, my hand still gripping David's arm. She saw us, he murmured. No, I said. She almost saw us. Outside, the wind cut colder. A limousine door slammed. Ryan and Mara emerged to a storm of cameras, flashbulbs igniting like tiny bombs. He reached for Mara's hand, guiding her in. She didn't look at him once. Lydia stayed back, scribbling furiously. David and I melted into the throng, just two more strangers at a stranger's funeral. But as we reached the corner of the churchyard, a soft buzz vibrated in my coat pocket. We hadn't told anyone we were alive. No one should have this number. I pulled the burner phone out. No caller ID, just a single text. I know what he did. We need to talk. We didn't answer the text. We didn't need to. By the time we reached the edge of the city 2 nights later, the plan had hardened between us like ice. It wasn't enough to watch Ryan's show from the back pews anymore. It was time for him to feel what we had felt, the cold press of an unseen hand at his back. The street where Ryan lived now was everything our old life wasn't. Manicured hedges, discreet gates, security cameras tucked under eaves. David stayed in the borrowed car half a block away, hood up, eyes scanning the mirrors. My palms were damp inside the gloves as I crossed the street under the cover of midnight drizzle. The envelope was thin, unmarked. Inside, one line, scrawled in block letters David had printed with his good hand. We know what you did. No signature, no return address. Just a ghost's whisper. I crouched and slid it under the front door. The brass knob gleamed like an eye. For a heartbeat, I saw our family's old house in its reflection. Ryan at 8, running barefoot across the lawn. Then the drizzle became rain, and the moment broke. I turned and walked back to the trees. Inside the car, David's jaw was tight. Done? Done, I said. We drove to the edge of the woods overlooking his property, killed the headlights, and waited. Rain pinged softly against the roof. My breath fogged the glass as I raised the binoculars. Through the wide living room windows, I saw him. Ryan had just come in. He bent to pick up the envelope, frowning. He tore it open with his thumb. For a long second, he didn't move. Then his head snapped up, scanning the room. He strode to the windows, yanking the curtains aside like a man expecting an intruder to leap out. Mara appeared at the edge of the frame. Hair in a loose knot. Robe cinched tight. She said something I couldn't hear. He held the letter up. She reached for it, but he pulled it back, crumpling it in his fist. She stepped closer. Her lips moved again, sharper this time. She was begging. I could read it even from here. Call the police. Ryan's response was a hiss, a quick shake of his head. He shoved the letter into the fireplace and struck a match. The paper curled, blackened, then flamed. He watched it burn, jaw working, hands flexing open and closed. Mara backed away, arms crossed, eyes flicking toward the front door like she wanted to leave but didn't know how. My heart beat so hard it hurt. Seeing him unsettled, stripped of his performance, should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like touching a live wire. David's voice cut through the rain. He's unpredictable now. I lowered the binoculars. Good, I whispered. Let him feel hunted. But my hands were shaking, not from cold. From the same kind of tremor you get when you know a caged animal has just noticed the bars. Inside the house, Ryan was pacing. He snatched his phone off the table, dialed, then stopped, hung up, threw the phone down, picked it up again. Each movement faster, sharper. Then, abruptly, he went still. Mara had said something again. He turned toward her slowly, eyes hard. For a heartbeat, I thought he might. No. He only reached for her shoulder, gripping it too tightly, murmuring something low. She nodded quickly, eyes wide. He let go. I watched him cross the room and pull the curtains closed. The house became a dark square of silence. I lowered the binoculars, pulse in my throat. The rain slicked across my scarf, dripped from my chin. David shifted beside me. "This is only the beginning," he said. "I know," I whispered. Then, faint but clear through the downpour, a sound carried from the trees below. Footsteps. Not Ryan's, not ours. Close. Too close. David froze, eyes on mine. "They're watching him," I said. "Or us." The footsteps stopped. In the distance, a branch snapped. The article dropped at 9:03 a.m. sharp. David and I read it in silence from a library terminal in a town we didn't dare say aloud. The headline was simple. Clean. Just curious enough. Unanswered Questions in the Carter Cliff Tragedy. By Lydia Hale, staff investigative reporter. The piece didn't accuse. Not yet, it asked. Why were no bodies recovered after 2 weeks? Why did the son, now the sole heir to several holdings, push so aggressively for the search to be closed? And why did Mara Sinclair, his fiancée, offer no comment when asked about inconsistencies in Ryan's timeline? It was cautious, surgical, but it was in print, and it was public. "She's opening the door," David murmured, scrolling down. "She's daring him to walk through it," I said. By noon, Ryan's front door opened to the county sheriff. We watched from across the street, parked in a borrowed utility van. The curtains inside Ryan's house shifted as the two men stood on the porch. The sheriff wore plainclothes, soft plaid, worn badge clipped to his belt. Nothing aggressive, just a casual visit. But even from here, I could see the stiffness in Ryan's jaw. The sheriff gestured toward the backyard. They walked side by side, slow, like neighbors discussing lawn care. But when they stopped under the awning, Ryan turned suddenly, sharp. His mouth moved fast, too fast. David lifted the binoculars. "He's losing it," he muttered. "Already?" I asked. David handed me the lenses. Ryan's posture had changed. His shoulders were squared, his hands clenched. I couldn't hear the words, but I read them in his face. "Are you accusing me?" The sheriff didn't flinch, just folded his arms and let the silence stretch. Ryan turned away, scrubbed a hand over his face. The sheriff said something else, probably harmless on the surface. Then he tipped his hat and walked off. Ryan stood alone on the porch for a long time. Inside the house, Mara was watching. She stood behind the sheer curtains, arms crossed, face unreadable. But something had shifted in her too. I could see it in the way she flinched when Ryan turned and stormed back inside. Later that night, I watched them through the same window. He was in the kitchen, moving with that tight, wound-up energy I remembered from when he was young, when he was trying to lie and didn't know how yet. He grabbed a plate, slammed it into the sink. Mara said something. He didn't answer, just walked past her like she wasn't there. She followed, touched his arm. He turned on her so fast I nearly gasped. Not a hit, not quite. But close enough. David grabbed my arm. "Evelyn." I was already moving. I pulled the pendant from my pocket. The one Ryan gave me on my 50th birthday. Silver, shaped like a small compass. He said it was to remind me that I'd always been his north, that no matter how far he went, he'd find his way back to me. I left it on the porch, tucked into the corner where the doormat met the brick. No note, no packaging, just the truth. Silent and shining. We retreated to the woods again. Less than an hour later, the porch light clicked on. Ryan opened the door. He stared down at the mat. He didn't move for a long time. Then he bent, slowly, and picked up the pendant. His hands trembled. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the door frame, the compass clenched in his fist like it might bite him. Mara stepped outside behind him, confused. He didn't show her. He just stood, frozen, breathing hard. From the trees, I watched through the scope of my camera, lens steady despite my shaking hands. "Do you see us now?" I whispered. David didn't answer. He was staring at the driveway. A black SUV had pulled in. No headlights, no plates. Inside the tinted window, a silhouette neither of us recognized. "Someone else is here," he said. The black SUV didn't stay long. It idled, door never opening, then rolled back into the night like a ghost. But whatever it left behind stayed in Ryan's house. Within days, we watched the glow of his windows change. Lights on at odd hours, curtains drawn tighter, shadows moving across rooms where no one should have been. And bottles. Always more bottles. From our perch in the tree line, we could see the glint of glass piling up on his kitchen counter. Bourbon, vodka, wine, all bleeding into one dark shape at the edge of his nights. His movements grew erratic. Sometimes he'd step onto the porch mid-afternoon, hair disheveled, scanning the yard as if he expected his dead parents to rise from the soil. David whispered, "He's circling the drain." But circling men can still lash out. One night, after hours of pacing, Ryan exploded. We heard the crash before we saw it, a bottle shattering against the far wall of the living room. He stalked toward Mara, who stood near the couch clutching her phone, knuckles white. He didn't hit her. He didn't need to. The violence hung in the air like smoke. She waited until he left the room. Then she moved fast, phone to her ear, whispering. Through the telephoto lens, I caught only fragments of her mouth's movements, but the name came clear. Lydia. She's calling Lydia. David leaned closer. She's jumping into the fire. I couldn't look away. Or she's the only one who knows the way out. 2 nights later, Lydia met Mara at a coffee shop on the far edge of town. We followed at a distance, slipping into a booth by the window as they took a corner table. Lydia's hair was pulled back, no makeup, jacket zipped high like armor. Mara looked smaller, drained, eyes flicking to the door with every sound. "If you tell me everything," Lydia said, voice low but firm, "I can protect you." Mara's hands trembled around the paper cup. She looked down, then up, then spoke. No drama, no embellishment. Just a confession spilling across the table. The offshore accounts. The fight before the cliff. The push. Her voice cracked only once, when she said she'd tried to stop him. Lydia didn't react outwardly. She only took notes, her pen scratching like a blade. When Mara finished, she closed the notebook gently, like a priest shutting a Bible. "You've done the right thing," she said. "Now I do mine." That was the moment I felt the cold start in my gut. Because I knew what Lydia didn't. Ryan was already watching everyone who asked questions. Back at our rented room above a hardware store, the glow of my phone lit the sheets. Lydia's article in progress had pinged my anonymous email, a small gesture she thought was courtesy, a hint that she was moving, that she was about to go public. I stared at the words. Offshore, fraud, cover-up. He'd kill her for them. "He'll come for her," I said out loud. My voice didn't sound like mine. David looked up from the map he'd been marking. His jaw tightened. Then we stop hiding. I met his eyes. If we do this, we burn everything. No more shadows. His fingers closed around the pen, snapping it clean in half. Maybe that's the only way. For a long moment we just sat there. Rain pattered against the window, steady and thin. The sound of Lydia's pen still echoed in my head. The sound of Ryan's bottle shattering followed it. A duet of danger. I pictured her walking out of that coffee shop, notebook under her arm, believing she'd just taken the first step toward justice. I pictured him, drunk and feral, dialing a number he wasn't supposed to know. Then my burner buzzed again. A new text. She's next. The night cracked open with the sound of tires screaming against gravel. I barely made it to the window before I saw her, Mara, bolting barefoot across the lawn, one hand clutching her side, the other holding what looked like her purse, or maybe just a bundle of clothes. A porch light snapped on behind her. Ryan's silhouette filled the doorway. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The look on his face, even from 100 feet away, was a promise. The kind of promise that ends in blood. David moved fast, grabbing the keys. She's headed for Lydia. She won't make it alone. We drove without headlights, our tires humming like a warning the wind didn't carry fast enough. The GPS was already up. Lydia had sent coordinates to a secondary burner in case of emergency. A cabin outside Barrow Lake. One road in, none out. 20 minutes later, we pulled up behind a dust-coated Subaru, her car. Mara stood on the porch, wrapped in a flannel blanket, pale as wax under the porch light. Lydia stood beside her, stiff, watching us like we were just more ghosts stepping out of the dark. I stepped into the light. Mara's eyes widened. Her breath caught. "You're—" she began. Evelyn didn't let her finish. "Yes," she said. Her voice wasn't gentle. "And you're about to help us bury the man you're still protecting." Mara looked between us. "You don't understand. I didn't tell him anything. I tried to keep it quiet. I needed to know if it was true." "It is," I said. "Every goddamn word." She blinked at me, then at David, who hadn't spoken. He was watching the tree line. Always watching. Lydia opened the cabin door. "Get inside. If he followed, we don't want to give him a shot at the front porch." Inside, it smelled like cedar and coffee and fear. Lydia had already set up a voice recorder on the counter, one of those small, high-end ones journalists carried when they didn't trust cloud storage. Her laptop was open. The screen blinked. Incoming call pending. I looked at her. She nodded. 3 minutes ago, from a restricted number. I didn't pick up. David stepped closer. "It's him?" She glanced at Mara. Mara nodded slowly. "He knows." I didn't ask how. I didn't have to. Ryan had always been 2 steps ahead. Of the cops, the press, even his own fiancée. If he'd hacked her messages, it was already too late to contain the explosion. Lydia tapped the space bar. The call began. First came static, then a voice. Low, slurred, but unmistakably his. "I don't know what the hell you think you're doing, but I see you. All of you. You think she's clean?" A pause. A bitter laugh. "She was there too. Ask her where the money went. Ask her how many times she threatened to tell, until I gave her something better." Mara flinched. "I kept this damn family from collapsing, from humiliation. And this is what I get? A lynch mob and a half-dead wife crawling out of the woods?" Another pause. "You want truth? Fine." She screamed when he fell. I didn't. He was weak. Always was. The line went dead. The room stayed silent. I looked at Mara. She wouldn't meet my eyes. But she didn't deny anything. Evelyn stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Now we have him," she whispered. David exhaled, but it wasn't relief. It was something heavier. Final. Then Lydia's phone buzzed. She glanced down, froze. I walked to her side. My eyes scanned the screen. New message. "Don't run. I'm already there." Lights flared outside. Headlights. One car. No sound. Just heat off the engine and a single figure stepping out. I didn't need the night vision scope to know who it was. Ryan had found us. The cabin emptied fast. No yelling, no panicking, just the silent scramble of people who'd already imagined the worst and planned accordingly. Mara stayed behind, tucked in a crawl space Lydia had reinforced with steel and silence. Lydia handed her a flashlight, a protein bar, and a loaded revolver. "Only if he finds you," she said, not a second before. Then we were gone. Evelyn drove. Lydia sent the file, only part of it, straight to the county sheriff's private number from a dummy email account. No subject line, just a clean, compressed audio clip of Ryan all but confessing to a death and a cover-up. It would be enough to crack the seal, not enough to scare him off. But Ryan was already scared. And men like him don't run when they're cornered. They retreat to places that once made them feel invincible. David called it before the text even landed. "He'll go back there," he said, staring out the window as we wound through the pass. To the cliff, to remind himself he got away with it once. I didn't ask if he was sure. We were all sure. The Jeep's tires crunched over loose stone as we pulled off the main road and onto the old logging path. The forest here was darker, older, the kind of quiet that held breath. No cabins, no cell service, just memory and rot. David killed the engine. "We walk from here." It took 30 minutes of hiking to reach the edge, and there it was. The ledge that fractured everything. The drop wasn't sheer. It sloped first, then vanished into a crush of rocks below, where my body was supposed to disappear forever. I could still see the blood stain in my mind, the echo of Ryan's voice, calm as a prayer, telling me it would all be over soon. I didn't realize my hands were shaking until the camera nearly slipped from them. Evelyn knelt beside me, steadying the lens with her own fingers. "Just like we planned," she whispered. "Motion triggered, 2 angles, sound rolling." My mouth was dry. What if he doesn't say it? "He will," David said behind us. "He always does. In the end, he wants someone to hear it." We fell back into the trees, hid beneath the low branches and pine stink, waited. The wind shifted, then footsteps. Heavy, unhurried. Branches snapping under boots too expensive for this terrain. Ryan. He stepped into the clearing like it belonged to him, still wearing the same coat, black wool, tailored to conceal. His hair was damp from sweat or rage, maybe both. He stood at the edge for a long time, staring down into the place where he thought I'd died. Then he screamed, "You can't ruin me!" His voice cracked on the last word, raw with fury. He turned in a slow circle, arms raised like he was demanding the trees bear witness. "I built everything. Everything. You think you can undo that with a tape recorder and a sob story?" He kicked a stone off the cliff. Watched it fall. "I kept this family together while the rest of you tore it apart. He was weak. You." He stopped, panting. "You were worse." That was enough. David stepped out from the trees. No gun, no mask. Just a man who refused to die when told to. Ryan's face turned the color of ash. David's voice cut clean through the space between them. "We already did." Ryan blinked. Once, twice. Then he reached inside his coat. And I realized, Too late. He hadn't come alone. For a heartbeat, the whole clearing froze, a tableau cut from stone. Ryan's hand disappeared deeper into his coat. David's fists curled. My pulse drummed in my ears like rotor blades. Then Ryan moved first. He didn't pull a gun. He lunged, straight at me. I stumbled backward, bark tearing my palms. But before he reached me, David slammed into him from the side. Both men went down in a whirl of coats and fists, sliding toward the edge of the cliff. The gravel there was loose, the same treacherous scree I remembered clawing at when I went over. Their boots skidded, dust rose. "David!" I shouted. Ryan drove an elbow into David's ribs, trying to lever himself upright. His face was twisted, eyes wild, teeth bared. "You made me weak," he spat. "All of you! You never believed in me!" David grunted, twisting to keep Ryan pinned. "We believed," he hissed, breath ragged, "until you killed that belief." The words hit Ryan like a slap. He heaved his weight sideways, dragging both of them dangerously close to the drop. The edge crumbled under their boots, spitting small stones into the abyss below. I lunged forward, but the earth shifted beneath me, a hollow sound that told me if I moved wrong, I'd go down with them. "Get back!" David barked, teeth clenched as Ryan clawed at his jacket. Ryan's fingers found a rock, small but sharp. He swung it blindly. It nicked David's forehead, a thin arc of blood spraying against the pale stone. "You ruined me!" Ryan screamed. "I built everything from nothing, and you—" His voice cracked into a jagged wail. "You all just watched." Evelyn stepped out of the trees then, no longer hiding. Her face was white, but her voice steady. "Enough!" she shouted. "It ends now." Ryan's head whipped toward her. For an instant his grip on David slackened, just enough for the ground to shift under them. The lip of the cliff gave way with a sharp crack like a gunshot. Both men slid forward, shoes scraping, gravel rolling under their bodies. David locked one arm around a thick root jutting from the cliffside and the other around Ryan's coat. His teeth were bared, not in rage, but in raw exertion. "I've got him!" he yelled. Ryan flailed, eyes flashing panic for the first time. "Let go of me!" he shouted, but the words had no power now. They were a plea, not a threat. I scrambled forward, digging my fingers into David's jacket, helping pull both of them inch by inch away from the edge. My nails split against the fabric, but I didn't stop. When we finally hauled them back onto solid ground, Ryan collapsed on his hands and knees, chest heaving. David rolled to his back, blood streaking his temple, breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. Evelyn stepped between them, her hand closing around something in her coat pocket. When she drew it out, it glinted in the gray light, the flash drive. She raised it high, her voice clear, cutting through the wind. "This ends here," she said. "Every lie, every cover-up, every name you thought you'd buried." Ryan's head snapped up. He stared at the drive as if it were a weapon more dangerous than any blade. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, faint at first, the echo of sirens drifted up from the valley below, not the wail of a single car, but many, getting closer. Lydia had called. Ryan's eyes darted to the trees, to the drive, to the cliff. The panic in him hardened into something darker, a last desperate calculation. His hand twitched toward his coat again. "Don't," I warned, but he didn't even look at me. He took a single step backward, heel finding the loose edge of the cliff. And he smiled. The first cruiser broke through the tree line a minute later. Lights off, but unmistakable. Then came another, and another. Boots pounded the earth like thunder as deputies poured out, weapons drawn, shouting orders that cut the mountain's silence in half. "Hands where we can see them! Now!" Ryan didn't move. He just stood there at the edge, still half smiling, the wind tugging at his coat. One step back and he could be gone. Not justice, not trial, just a final act of control. I held my breath, but something in him cracked. He turned slowly, facing the line of officers with their rifles raised and jaws locked tight. And then he dropped. Just like that. Knees hitting the ground, hands behind his head. The smile gone. In its place, a crumpled, heaving man, sobbing like something inside him had finally given out. Two deputies moved in fast. Handcuffs clicked like punctuation. I didn't look away. Even as they read him his rights, voice clipped, practiced, Ryan kept his head down, shoulders shaking, the coat sagging off his frame like it no longer fit the man wearing it. Lydia appeared on the ridge above, camera in hand, hair pulled back tight. Her lens didn't flinch. She moved slowly, professionally, documenting everything, not for shock, not for fame, for truth. Behind her, Mara stood wrapped in that same flannel blanket from the cabin, her face pale but her spine straight. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But her eyes were locked on Ryan like she was watching the end of a dream, or the waking from one. Evelyn hadn't moved. She stood a few paces behind the officers, her hands limp at her sides. The flash drive still hung from her fingers, the metal dull now in the gray morning light. Her eyes were dry but not empty. Something deeper was sitting behind them, not triumph, not peace, just wait. I stepped closer, but it was David who reached her first. Quietly, gently. He placed a hand on her back, just between her shoulders. "We survived him, Eve," he whispered. "That's enough." For a long time, she didn't answer. Then she nodded. Once. Her eyes found Ryan again, but this time there was no recognition in her expression. None of the pain or hope I'd seen flicker through her before. She looked at him like you look at a stranger in a newspaper article, like the boy she'd once raised, once fought for, once protected, no longer existed. He didn't look up. The sheriff finally stepped forward. "We'll take it from here," he said, not unkindly. Then he nodded to the officers, and Ryan was pulled to his feet. As they led him toward the cruisers, the sun cracked over the eastern ridgeline, slanting gold through the trees and lighting the cliffside in full. It didn't feel redemptive. It felt honest. We stood in it, the five of us, saying nothing, breathing in the thin, cold mountain air, thick with sap and ash and endings. Then Evelyn turned. She handed me the flash drive. "Give it to Lydia," she said. "Let it all come out. All of it." I took it. It felt heavier than it should have. Lydia nodded once, solemn. "The story's yours, but the truth's mine." We began walking, one slow step at a time, the earth finally holding steady beneath our feet. Behind us, the cruiser doors slammed shut. Ahead, the road curved down toward the valley, toward something that might resemble life again. But as we moved past the trees and the blood-slick gravel, I glanced back once more. Ryan sat behind the cruiser glass, eyes forward, lips moving silently. Not in prayer, not in regret. Just words only he could hear. And the sun kept rising anyway. The mountain had been stripped of snow by the time Lydia came back. The thaw had reached the valleys, and everything smelled of wet earth and new grass. But inside my house, the air was still winter. Curtains drawn, mail unopened. The flash drive sat on the kitchen table like a loaded weapon I couldn't quite bring myself to fire. She didn't call first. She just appeared in my doorway, hair loose, jacket creased from a long drive. She looked older, not tired exactly, but worn from carrying too much truth. "You should sit," she said. I didn't. Her eyes flicked to the flash drive, then back to me. "It's not over." My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "Ryan's behind bars. It's over." "No," she said softly. "It's moving." She slid a folder across the table. Bank printouts, wire confirmations, numbers blacked out except for the dates. The most recent one circled in red, 2 weeks after Ryan's arrest. Offshore money flowing, neat as clockwork, into a shell company in Delaware. I felt something cold slide through me. "He can't do that from a holding cell." "That's the point," she said. "Someone else is." The room tilted. Lydia reached into her bag again and set down another folder, one I recognized before it opened. Edward's old files. My husband's. Records from a life we'd once thought transparent. I started cross-checking, she said, her voice flat with fatigue. Patterns, signatures. It led back to an account under a different name. Someone close. Someone you wouldn't look at twice. My breath felt heavy. "Who?" She didn't answer. She just pushed the file toward me. The name sat there in black ink like a bruise. David Keller. The floor seemed to drop under me. I must have stared for a full minute before I could speak. "No, you're wrong. He saved me. He risked. He also kept the money moving," she said quietly. "Every transfer. Clean. Hidden." I couldn't feel my hands. I don't even remember standing, but suddenly I was in the hallway, pulling open the drawer where I kept Edward's old receipts. Lydia followed, silent, as I scattered papers across the floor. And there it was. A single page I'd overlooked 100 times, a signature in David's hand. Same slanted K as on the transfer slips. My throat burned. When I finally found him, he was on the back porch, looking at the hills. The same hills we'd driven through to trap Ryan. He turned when he heard me, saw the folder in my hands. His face closed like a door. "I should have told you," he said. "Start now," I said, my voice breaking. He exhaled, slow. "At first it was just bookkeeping. I thought Ryan was trying to protect what was left after Edward died. He told me he'd straighten it out, that it was just family money in bad hands. I was covering for him. I never thought he'd go that far." I stared at him, the man who had pulled me back from the edge of a cliff. The man who had said, "We survived him." "You helped him," I whispered. "I tried to protect you," David said. His voice cracked for the first time. "I thought if I kept it quiet, if I controlled it, it wouldn't touch you. I swear to God, Evelyn." "You protected him instead," I said quietly. The silence after that wasn't like before. It wasn't heavy. It was hollow. He took a step toward me, but I stepped back. The folder trembled in my hand. Through the open door behind him, the hills glowed gold under the late sun, and for a moment I felt like I was back on the cliff, the ground ready to give way. "Evelyn, please," he said. "Tell me what to do." I didn't answer. Because for the first time since Ryan's arrest, I didn't know who the enemy was anymore. And somewhere out there, the money was still moving. I left before sunrise. The cabin didn't feel like a place I'd been living, just a shell I'd been haunting. Every corner held some echo of before. David's boots by the door, the mug with the chipped rim, the chair by the window where he used to read aloud when the generator failed. I didn't tell him I was going. I didn't need to. He knew. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. I just turned the key and set it on the mat. By the time the lake came into view, the morning was sharp and clean, all mist and bird song, and the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be earned. The cottage was smaller than the cabin, just 2 rooms and a stove that coughed when I lit it. But the windows opened wide and the dock creaked under bare feet, and that was enough. David stayed in the hills. We spoke only once in the weeks that followed. A letter he left in the mailbox outside the grocery store, folded in half with no return address. "You were always the brave one," it said. I was just trying to keep up. I didn't reply. Instead, I wrote, "Every morning, before the sun cleared the trees, I sat at the little table by the window and let it pour out of me. The story, the secrets, the rot. I didn't shape it into something pretty. I didn't soften the parts where I looked away, or where David did. I didn't excuse the years of silence that allowed Ryan to become something unrecognizable." Lydia edited lightly. She said it didn't need polish, just air. The piece went live on a Thursday. The couple who rose from the dead to expose their son. The headline stretched across the page like a dare. Beneath it, Lydia's byline. "But it was my voice you heard, my pain, my fault, my truth." It spread fast. Talk shows, podcast segments, online forums calling it a tragedy, a triumph, a parable. Some said I was a hero. Others said I should have seen it coming, that a mother always knows. They were wrong. There are some monsters you only recognize once they turn on you. The mail piled up. Handwritten letters from strangers, notes from victims of fraud, of family betrayal, of silence. Survivors, they called themselves. And still, I felt hollow. One night, after reading a dozen of those letters, I sat on the dock with a wool blanket wrapped tight around my shoulders. The moon hung low, full and swollen, reflecting in the lake like it didn't care who was watching. I whispered into the water, "Survival doesn't feel like victory." The wind didn't answer. But in the days that followed, something shifted. Not joy, not even forgiveness. Just stillness. I started planting herbs in old coffee cans, the kind Edward used to grow before the boys were born. I cooked for myself. One plate. No apologies. I hung a wind chime by the door, and when it moved, I let it remind me that time was passing, that I was still here. One morning, I opened a window and didn't flinch at the breeze. And another morning, I found myself writing again, not for Lydia, not for the world, just for me. It wasn't about Ryan, or David, or Edward. It was about a woman standing in a kitchen with a pot of mint, a chipped mug, and the sound of water hitting shore. And as I wrote, I felt something take root in me that hadn't lived there in years. Peace. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. But peace, I'd learn, never arrives without its price. Because the next knock on the door wasn't Lydia. It was the IRS. And they weren't asking about Ryan. It took me 3 months to come back. Not because I was afraid. Not exactly. But because I needed to be sure that if I stood on that cliff again, I'd do it on my terms. Not his. Not Edward's. Not even David's. Just mine. The air had shifted by the time I got there. Warmer. Greener. Saplings clawing their way through cracks in the rock. Life returning in slow defiance. I parked at the base of the old trail and hiked the final mile alone. My boots kicking up loose dust, a bottle of water slapping against my hip. The path was steeper than I remembered. Or maybe my body just felt older now. More mine, more mortal. No one following, no one watching. At the summit, the view hit like a pulse. The same sharp drop, the same jagged rocks below. But the ghosts were quieter now. I walked to the edge, careful, steady, until my toes flirted with the rim. The wind was high, cold, and blunt, and it roared through the canyon like something finally exhaling. I opened my palm. My wedding ring sat there, dull with time, scratches along the inner band where the engraving used to be. I'd taken it off the day the IRS came, but I'd kept it all this time. Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of guilt. Or maybe because it was the last thing I hadn't let go of. I closed my eyes and let it fall. It vanished without sound, swallowed by the same gorge that was supposed to swallow me. For a moment, I imagined it finding company at the bottom. The past, the rot, the secrets. Then the wind rose again, slicing across my face, sharp and clean. It didn't sting this time. It felt freeing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Lydia, the last story's up. Your edit's perfect. The world knows the truth. You're free. I stared at the message for a long time, thumb resting just above the reply. Then I smiled. Just a faint curl at the corner of my mouth. Like the first step of something I hadn't yet learned how to name. I was dead once. I whispered into the wind. Now I'm alive. There wasn't an echo, just the hush of the pines, and somewhere below, the distant rush of water finding its way downhill. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I turned away from the edge, and I walked. Each step was deliberate, not slow, but certain. The kind of certainty that only comes when you've survived what should have ended you. When you've stood at the place where someone tried to erase you and felt not erased, but rooted. Behind me, the cliff stayed still, waiting maybe for the next person foolish enough to trust someone who didn't earn it. But I wouldn't be back. Not here. Not like this. I reached the trailhead as the sun began to dip, painting the rocks in a warm amber wash. I took one last breath of the cold, high air, and I said it out loud, because no one had yet. Not in the news, not in the trial, not even in the articles Lydia published. He pushed us off a cliff to silence us, I said, but our fall became the sound of his end. And then I left, not running, not haunted, just whole.